a snapshot. When we saw the flooding from the hurricane in Houston last year, do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Houston was underwater. We got reports of nursing homes where all the people died because the power was out. It was very hot, and you had people hooked up to machines, their oxygen. People died, and you couldn't get to them.
And this was not reported in the news?
Some of the reporting was in the news, but when we had the hurricane in Florida as well, or when we've had tornadoes or power outages in different areas, a lot of elderly people die. And so if the grid went down instantly, overnight, imagine, no one can get their medicine, their heart medicine, dialysis, all the people who depend on dialysis in America, they wouldn't have that ability. They're gone in a matter of weeks. You have all the people needing their heart medicine, people who depend on the pacemakers would be gone. Mm-hmm. So the elderly, right off the bat, are in trouble. And then think of the people in hospitals and ICUs; they're done. Mm-hmm. They're gone. And then when you try to think of airplanes in the air, at any given moment, there's 6,000 to 10,000 airplanes in the air. They all crash.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we start looking at the numbers. Waste no longer works. The toilets don't work. The toilets, after a while, start backflowing, so you have sewage problems. The garbage pickup is no longer done. There's no water coming out of the faucet. So where do people get water? It would turn into a Mad Max.
Mm-hmm. And how will people prepare themselves?
Well, you see those prepper shows on cable TV where people are talking about saving food and preparing for this, but and those measures probably work for some people, but depending on where they live, they might or they might not. But Mike, human nature is very interesting. Lord of the Flies was a good case study, a social study of what people do when they get desperate. At first, when an emergency happens, people help each other, like in a tornado scenario. Uh-huh. People look at bodies, and they want to help, and everyone pitches in during a tornado because they know they can still go home. But what if there's no home to go to, and it's dog eat dog, and people want to feed their kids, and their children are crying, they're thirsty? What changes occur in the behavior of men socially? Well, when we look at some of the snapshots of similar scenarios, we go to Yugoslavia, Bosnia. Remember that, the Bosnian War?
Mm-hmm, I remember that, yes.
They didn't have for a while, and it became dog eat dog. Neighbors were robbing each other. It turned into people having to burn their furniture to try to warm their house. If it's in the winter and there's no heater, what do you do? Mm-hmm. Just right there. If the power went out when we had these cold snaps just recently, what would happen to those people trying to stay warm when it's 0 degrees outside? Mm-hmm. Just right there, Mike. So there's all kinds of scenarios, or if it's in the summer, in the heat of summer, and no air conditioner, or people have to walk home. So it's an interesting scenario, and the Russians and the Chinese have studied the social makeup of people. And if you can imagine how people would behave in a post-apocalyptic no-power scenario, it gets spooky because people change. Mm-hmm. And things that they never thought they would do, they do out of desperation.
Uh-huh. And of course, making things of some of the series as well, being a music fan, I remember Genesis Land of Confusion, where everything explodes, people don't know what to do, they're all confused. Also, Left Behind series, people look to that. And speaking of Left Behind, I know you referenced it a few times. Give us some of your thoughts on that series. The
Left Behind series was written by a gentleman who had a certain viewpoint on how the end times were going to take place, so he made a fictional snapshot of it, and he wrote a series of books that are real interesting. Now, whether or not it will play out exactly like he wrote is up for debate because, artistic license. But it is an interesting way of looking at the end times. One thing we do agree with in the end times, the Bible prophesies that at some point at the very, very end of time, there's going to be a second coming and Messiah will return from heaven. Mm-hmm. But before that happens, some people have a viewpoint it will be a 3.5 year window of time or a 7-year window of time. But either way, it's going to be a series of events that are prophesied, and it's basically the movie 2012 taking place. You know, volcanoes and earth changes, climate change. It's doom. Hollywood surround sound doom is prophesied to take place in the last book of the Revelation. So that's also another thing I look at. And, you know, when people listen to the things I share, it does get scary, because as long as people keep it in the fictional, it stays fun. But when you start thinking that this could actually be reality and what if this takes place in my lifetime, it can get a little spooky. It can, and I know that. I understand that. So one of the other things to face is the mental challenge to deal with that, and the spiritual application, or the spiritual, what does it mean spiritually? Well, since I come from a biblical worldview, it means to make your life better, get your life in order, make sure you're right with God. So I also include that, and that's hard for people to hear, though, and I understand it, because we live in a crazy world, Mike.
Right. And yes, it's very important as well, too, to keep in mind, you know, down the future as well, too. And, of course, of all the dreams that you've had ever since you started Watchman Carr being in ministry, what percentage you say have come accurate?
Well, on April the 18th, 2008, this was my first one. This was kind of at the very beginning of Watchman's Cry, and I was alone. It was late at night. And I felt a nudge in my spirit. And being a Christian, as a Christian, we do that. If we have like a nudge in our spirit, man, and that nudge can be from God. And so you try to listen, and you wonder, is that you, God, or is that me, or what's going on? So I had a nudge, and I had the feeling that I had to go pray. So I went and prayed, and then the nudge got stronger, and I started hearing these words in my head. I mean, they were loud in my head. So the words included, you need to write this down. So I wrote down these words, and I published it on April 18th, 2008. And the words said that the end times had begun. And it had a list of events that were going to come. And one of the things it included, it said because of the way that people have been behaving over the last few years, God is going to poison the waters of America. So prepare for the poisoning of the waters of the land. And I wrote this down. I published it. I didn't understand it, Mike. But I put it up, and I said American water is going to get poisoned. I put it out there, and that was in April 18th, 2008. Well, fast forward 2 years. Now, this was April 18th, 2008. On April 20th, 2010, almost to the day, the Deepwater Horizon Gulf spill occurred and poisoned the Gulf of Mexico. And for a year, because of the core exit that was supposed to take care of the oil and separate the oil and make it go to the bottom, core exit poisoned the life and the shrimp, and it killed a lot of the ocean marine life in the Gulf of Mexico. Fish were getting legions and cancer, and the shrimp numbers were going down. Shrimpers were not making a living. It was horrible.
I remember that, and they complained like crazy, and I think the prices of most fish and shrimp went up that year. You couldn't even get shrimp. I think that's where they started developing tilapia, if I'm correct.
Yeah. In fact, people who took a dip in the waters started complaining of skin rash and irritations, and there were some fatalities of people that did end up dying of Gulf War syndrome, they called it, from the core exit. But this wasn't on the news. BP oil had, I don't know how they were able to do it, but there was a news blackout, and people who tried to film were told not to. They didn't allow airplanes to fly over a certain area of the Gulf of Mexico where they were spilling core exit for weeks and weeks, millions of gallons of poison. And there was a news blackout about it. But the alternative media was reporting, and they said that this core exit, you know, when you take a sample of it and compare it to what it does to marine life, it separates oil from water. So if a living organism or something alive comes in contact with it, it separates the oil and water in the cells of their actual body. And if you think about a human or a fish, our cells are made up of oil and water, and it kills.
I bet it does. I bet. Oh, my goodness. Wow.
So regarding, you asked me, did I have any words that came true. Well, I believe that the word of warning that God gave me about the poisoning of the water happened 2 years to the day, almost.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw it happen. And then Fukushima happened 2 years later, or a year later, and it poisoned the waters of the Pacific. And I shared that, and a lot of people took notice, and they said, that's interesting, Nathan. And then, of course, you have, and you're always going to have this, the scoffers who say that was a lucky coincidence, and that's fine. So that's up to the person to receive it or not.
Right.
But over the years, there have been others that I have shared, but a large portion of some of the dreams that I have had still haven't occurred, and a lot of them have to do with, and this is a little spooky, Mike, I don't want to scare your audience, but a lot of them have to do with World War III.
Yeah, that's been talked about on the news lately as well, real news, fake news, or any network or whatever it is. And when you publish your first dream you had back in 2008, how much percentage you had were good, and how much of percentage you had were complaints, and how much percentage was just neutral?
At first, it was not many good and a lot of scoffing, but then when the Gulf spill happened, a lot of people came on board and said, whoa, that was interesting, Nathan. And then over the years, I have shared a lot of different glimpses of things, Mike, and I mean, there's been a lot that I have shared. And when people look into the news, for example, I said 10 years ago that our adversaries in the future are going to be Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
Because I actually had dreams, Mike, of MiG and Russian planes having dogfights with our American Air Force.
Uh-huh.
I've had dreams about it. I've seen them fighting each other, but get this, some of the dogfights were happening actually over American domestic soil.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
People have to say, what? How in the world are dogfights with Russian planes happening over? Exactly. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I had dreams about them. I had one dream that's real scary. I saw a missile fly from Asia, and it hit the island of Hawaii, a nuclear missile. I have seen I've had a dream of another one hitting. This is spooky, the Seattle area.
Mm-hmm.
So, but see, here's the thing. I'm not the only one, Mike. A lot of people on YouTube are having similar ones. Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also Iran. I've had dreams of Iran being the adversary. And at the time, people said, no, we have peace with China. We have peace with Russia. Nothing's going to happen. Well, now, if you look into the news, now America and Russia are waving their swords at one another, and also China and Iran. And I do believe at some point we are going to have a war with them.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so what do you do?
Now, are the Russians and the Chinese and the people in Iran, are they scared about this whole thing, or are they very confident?
Well, they show confidence, and of course that's what they have to do publicly, posture themselves and show toughness. But see, here's the thing. Russia and China have been working on alternative weapons that we don't even know about. There are actual rumors, and this supposedly took place. I can't verify it, but there's a rumor that in the Black Sea, which is the sea in Russia, it's in Europe, one of our military vehicles, ships, naval ships, was in the Black Sea, and a Russian military plane flew over our this actually happened. It flew within 100 feet over our destroyer.
Oh, my gosh.
And that's what they do. They do flybys to kind of intimidate and say, you look at me. And we do the same thing to them, flybys. But there's a rumor that the Donald C. Cook naval ship was in the Black Sea, and Russia used an experimental EMP weapon that was on their plane. As it flew over the ship, it fried the electronics and rendered it unable to actually work. It fried the ship.
Oh, my
goodness. And the ship no longer worked and had to be towed back and got help. Well, that was a rumor, and it's been on the Internet, and I have not been able to verify, but Russia has talked about it, and there have been some people in our U.S. military that have kind of leaked some information about it, that Russia has a weapon that they carry on their airplanes that can blast an EMP-directed laser or energy that can fry our military vehicles or ships or airplanes. And if this is true, Mike, I mean, imagine the consequences if we actually have a war and they start using a weapon this way. How do you